So we're looking at creating something more complex than our brick wall because we know that the shadow isn't just kind of going onto a flat front-facing surface, but it needs to sit down and be applied to something that looks like the surface of this street. So we could have any number of shadows in here. We could have a shadow on this wall. We could have a shadow on this wall. This wall, we could have it further down the road. But here we're going to keep it in a place where we can see the street light and we can see that it's casting a shadow directly through that text and down onto our shadow catcher. Now it is tricky to begin with because what we're going to do is we're going to try and change our view on our text and on our shadow catcher using cameras and cameras only. Now the reason for that is that if you reorient the objects with a camera, you can keep them in their default position here on the orthogonal view. So you can keep a simple kind of left, top, right, whatever view of your light, your object, your shadow plane. If you start using null objects and reorienting your objects using that approach, then things will get very unusual looking here. Things will be at odd angles. Even though it will look correct here, you'll find it very difficult to work with your orthogonal views, and it just gets a little bit difficult to control. So use that as your rule of thumb. The cameras are going to be used to reposition the object to where it needs to be. So let's get started. Just going to work from scratch here, and I'm going to create a solid, call it shadow, and a piece of text. I'll also, well, I'll call it text. Now, what I want to do is I want to set up a perpendicular relationship between the text and the solid. And this time I'm going to take a slightly different approach to usual, where I'm going to get my solid, and I'm going to go to one view for the moment, zoom in, and I'm going to take the anchor point tool. I'm going to get the shadow's anchor point. I'm going to move it down towards the bottom of the text layer, and then I'm going to hold down the control key. And what that does is it locks it to the bottom, or it snaps it to the bottom of the text object, so that the anchor point of the solid is now flush with the bottom of my text. That means that I can do a very simple 3D rotation on around the x-axis, so that I can get it to kind of flip back. Okay, so minus 90, or 90 would probably do the same thing, just in the other way. And now we have our text and our solid sitting together. Now, there's no need really for null objects when we take this approach, because I'm not going to touch the text and the solid. Okay, I want to keep this nice simple view so that I can work with the light and make things easy for myself. So I'm going to get my camera and I'm going to use the unified camera tools to do all of my moving. And I'm also going to show a little trick on how you can use your zoom to affect the perspective of the objects in the scene as well. So the easiest way to use the unified camera tool is to use the C key and just tap the C key until you go through the three tools. So the first tool I'm going to want to use is the up, down, left, right, which is this little kind of cross icon. And I'm going to drag down, and you'll see that the camera goes up, and it kind of creates the illusion that the text is going downwards. Okay. The next thing I want to do is I want to try and push that back so I can see the whole solid. So I click it again, the C key, and I pull back, and the object goes forward. And the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hit it to get the orbit, so I can kind of shove it around a little bit in space so that it sits into the geometry of that street. So now what I could do, if I wanted, I could kind of get my street and I can drag it back that way. Now this is kind of already giving me a decent sense of perspective, but maybe I want it to be more kind of more exaggerated, so that this edge of the solid kind of disappears down the edge of the road like that, and this one goes down the edge of that road, so I know I have good matching geometry between the road and my solid. Now the way that you do that is you open up the camera. Actually, you can double click on it, and where you see zoom, click and drag to the left to zoom out. you get a wider angle and you get exaggerated perspective. See how the vanishing point is kind of squeezing in there between the two parallel lines of my solid. Once you've got that done, you click OK. You go back to your unified camera tool. You kind of drag that around, reorient it, try and get it a little bit more on the street. So you see there now the edges of my shadow catcher are now nicely kind of matched up with the geometry or the perspective of the road. Now I can get my text and I can just drag that forward and I can start creating my light. So the next step is to create a light, same as usual, point light, and you'll see it straight away, it interacts with the solid. What I want to do is I want to get, first of all, I'll get a shadow cone, so I'll just make sure everything is enabled. Cast shadows, text, cast shadows. There we go. I can see a shadow there in the background. So the next thing I want to do is get that light somewhat up and behind my text. In fact, I want to go into, probably want to go into a different view here. I'm going to try and push it around this way so I can see the shadow is kind of coming off that way now. Right, okay. So what I might need to do at this point is just do a little shimmy on my text, go into top on this side, and get that light up and behind. And you can see it there. If you wanted to, you could actually get pretty literal with it, but I want to kind of keep it roughly there so that the light shines through the text and down onto my solid. Right, so I'll zoom in a little bit and I'll change my solid into a shadow catcher by changing its material options, casts or accepts shadows only. Now, here's the thing. If the shadow doesn't look quite dark enough, you can go up and you can change the darkness there, diffusion, things like that. You can also play around with, you know, bringing that down a little bit if you want to get the shadow a little bit longer. But the idea here is that now that we've created our shadow catcher and it's in the right place, we can click on its corners and we can make it bigger, which means that we can grab our text and we can now start moving that around, and the shadows will always stay in the right place. So the shadow is now kind of coming down into the front. The other thing we can do with our light is we can change the intensity, sorry, not the intensity, but the radius of the light. That has an effect on the shadow as well. It makes the shadows a little bit more pronounced. So it's kind of something I use in tandem with the shadow darkness. It just gives the shadows a little bit more body. And I can now push that back and you see a nice exaggerated shadow there. So I'll go into my one view, zoom it up, and can just push that around using the world view. I won't do it without that huge 3D axis there. Okay, you get the idea. We have a ground plane catching the shadow. We have our text. We can now do whatever we want with the text. So long as we don't go under the ground layer, we can play around with our text in any way that we want. And that is using a shadow catcher as a ground plane for our street.